We're starting with something slightly unusual.
Theoretical mummy. 6 days old, so fragile, so new. He'd been in intensive care, now moved to HDU. I wasn't too sure what I was meant to do. Still wired up, a drain in his tummy. I felt like a kind of theoretical mummy. "Okay, come on, Mum, you change his nappy." The voice was abrupt, verging on snappy. "You're going to have to learn how to do this, you know." At best, robustly encouraging. She was clearly the boss. Years of experience under her belt. Or she didn't give a toss. Not a clue how I felt. I felt she wanted to kick my backside. I felt sick. I just wanted to hide. I turned around and walked off the ward. Did nobody see I was anxious or frightened? I started to feel guilty for behaving so badly. And no one suggested I shouldn't feel that way.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Calvert, and thank you so much to Gill Phillips for asking me to talk to you all about co-production today. My journey with Gill, co-production, Whose Shoes, maternity, all kinds of different campaigns and experiences started when my youngest son was born with a congenital heart defect. He has hyperplastic left heart syndrome, and he's had 3 major surgeries and 1 minor. He's now 7 years old, doing very well. And whilst I was in hospital with him, in a paediatric hospital with him when he was about 5 months old, I really saw the lack of qualified breastfeeding support on paediatric wards and in paediatric hospitals. It was very noticeable, and I already had quite a substantial network of mums because I was running a Facebook group for mums at the time, and it became apparent this was quite a widespread issue. So I took to Twitter, which I had never really used before, to find people in the breastfeeding world and in the paediatric world who were interested in this as an issue to discuss. And I met some amazing people, fantastic people working in all areas of infant feeding, lactation, paediatrics, put together a great network quite quickly, actually. There was a lot of enthusiasm. And that led to the hospital breastfeeding campaign, which I ran for a few years. And I had the privilege of handing that baton to the Hospital Infant Feeding Network, which has been set up by Doctors Victoria Thomas and Ilana Levine. If you're not aware of their work, do look up hifn.org, and they have a group on Facebook. So they are now leading the charge when it comes to infant feeding support on paediatrics. And that would not have happened if it wasn't for the conversations that I started having and that people started having with each other through these networks. So that is just incredible to me because I'm still in the Facebook group. I'm not involved in the campaigning anymore, but I can see not just the progress that's being made, but the conversations that are happening, the people who are talking to each other from different hospitals, from different areas, from different professions, lactation consultants, private practice coming together with NHS. And it's just so wonderful to see the right people having these conversations together. So that's really exciting. Part of being on Twitter meant that I met Gill and Flo, who run the MatX campaign, Maternity Experience campaign, and I got heavily involved in that as well. And that's how I came across Gill's incredible Whose Shoes methodology, which I am just such a fan of, because it's all about bringing the right people together to have these conversations. And I think we all know that getting people in a room, getting the right voices together, hearing from a diverse group of people is important. But what Gill does is there are no token voices in Whose Shoes. So if you are a group of parents, then the healthcare professional is not the token voice. If you're a group of doctors, the patient or the patient parent is not the token voice. You're all equal, you all have valid things to say, and there's no hierarchy. It's just people all talking together with equal input. And it's the questions that are asked that really get you and really make you think differently about issues that you might have had strong views on for such a long time. So I really enjoyed that methodology and seeing how Gill worked and seeing how she just uses energy, goes where the energy is, and just brings people together to have these vital conversations. And it was such a privilege to be able to connect her with Joanne Minford at Alder Children's Hospital, which is where my son is looked after, and Whose Shoes came to Alder, which was just incredible. And I was able to attend a day with the Whose Shoes game being played by board members, parents, nurses, janitorial staff, just everybody, just exactly what you want, just everybody in the room, and having these really important discussions. And that was such a joy to see. And it's not that the parent voice isn't listened to in the NHS, it really is. But it's often on quite a tokenistic basis, and also it's often quite piecemeal. But when we have these amazing networks and collaborations using things like Twitter and Facebook, it's not piecemeal. You can start to build a web, and you can see the overlapping diagrams of who knows who and who's involved with who and who should be talking to who. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We already know, oh yes, so-and-so's done that in another hospital, let me put you in touch with them, which is just so powerful. There are still challenges in infant feeding support on paediatrics. And if that is an area you're interested in, I urge you to look at Lindsay Hookway's work on her project Breastfeeding the Brave, because she has done an incredible amount of research into this area. And in another twist, collaboration, network, whatever you want to call it, she is now a client of mine for my business. I'm now providing business support services to her. But she is somebody that I first came across through my networks on lactation. And it is a great privilege now I'm doing seemingly quite different work to still be working with some people in the perinatal field. I also work with Cheryl Wynn of Simply Natal, who was a part of one of my mum groups, and she had had a difficult time and was introduced to the concept of birth trauma, found it really helpful, and is now a healing birth doula with her business Simply Natal. So again, it's not just what we can achieve for other people, but it's what we can achieve for ourselves when we collaborate, because we find out concepts and ideas that are so beneficial to us and can be beneficial to our healing, our mental health, to our professional lives. We just don't know where these conversations are going to lead us. So it is a privilege to be able to tell a little bit, very quick whistle-stop tour of my journey today. But I really believe that the importance of Gill's work with Whose Shoes is to bring all voices together, true collaboration, not this is what we want to do, who can we get to back up that story, but really let's get everyone together, ask the questions, and we don't know where it's going to go. And we're going to be brave enough to say this is a really big challenge. But if we all keep talking to each other and recognizing each other's challenges and points of view, we can actually get somewhere, which is amazing. So thank you, Gill. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And yes, if you want to look me up anywhere, I am at Clear Day. Take care.
Well, thank you, Helen. It's just been such a privilege to bring Helen in, a mum from Manchester whose little boy had surgery in Liverpool. And I think we've got Jo Minford on the call here today as well. So we want to start from hearing from Helen Calvert, as we have done, and asking you, how did that feel? So we've got a Mentimeter. I don't know if people are familiar with that. And you've got the opportunity to put 3 words or short phrases into the Mentimeter or into the chat, and we'll make a word cloud. And we haven't said hello yet properly, have we, Mary? So I'm Gill, and
I'm Mary. And it's been a journey that has been really quite fun, just creating this session actually. So I hope you enjoy it.
So are people able to? We've got Colin here doing the tech. He'll explain if anybody's struggling. Here we go.
Okay. Got some results coming.
Oh, look at this. Amazing.
It was wondering if it's going to work. And we'll share this with Helen afterwards, because she's been such an amazing mum leader. I've just put that in the chat. So privileged to work with Helen. Every time I tweet with Helen, I put some wild horses emoji into the tweet, because she has been such a mover and shaker, not asking for anyone's permission, but just linking people up and making things happen. So what do you think about that, Mary, the response there?
I mean, it's brilliant, isn't it? I think when you see things working well, it does spur you on to doing things a little bit differently. And I just really like that central, inspiring, positive, encouraged. I think there's so much negativity sometimes within the work that we do, you know, because you just feel like you're having battles and fighting for improvement. And I think this is really quite a positive slant. So a nice way to start.
And co-production starting with the voices of the parents, not ours. Yeah. So over to you, Mary. We've got your presentation now that Colin's going to bring up for you.
Thank you.
Let me tell you about a story. The story is about my team, a children's discharge planning team based at Birmingham Children's Hospital since 2015. We've been looking at how to get children home, particularly children that are stuck between different systems and children with complex medical problems. We looked at why children were getting stuck when they were medically well enough to go home. Families and siblings were stuck with them, and they ended up staying and growing and developing in hospital. When we started looking at the problems, we identified that the systems around children and families were really complex. Health is very complex. Everyone is working really hard, but also it's hard to see the gaps and where we can move forward within them. So as part of this solution, we built a team, and the team was built of people with different viewpoints, different professional backgrounds, looking for solutions and creating spaces to share ideas. We created our vision, which was to look at a pop-up service. Often children that had a defined diagnosis or a clear pathway, particularly pathways that were funded very clearly, did okay. But the problems arose when children were stuck between different systems and different specialties and different local authorities, and children particularly whose families needed support in moving forward. When we started looking at this problem, we identified that the national barriers to discharge were quite aligned to the barriers that we had found, mainly around external agencies such as social care and housing, but also things like equipment sourcing and parental training and support, which was really important. So as we know, this was our story, but it was made up of so many other stories of children and families in very different parts of the hospital with different needs and different barriers. And so we started to look at how we would fix this problem. And to do this, we needed the children and the families. One such story that sticks with me is one of a father who was reluctant for carers to come to his home. And it was difficult to pin quite why until somebody explored this in a safe way with him. And he said he just wanted to be able to get a beer from his fridge without feeling judged or feeling like a bad dad. He just needed reassurance that this was okay and nobody would be judging him for this. When we got families together with young people and professionals in a room, the magic started happening. The room wasn't as pretty as this room, but the post-its were pretty similar. And we identified the process that children and young people needed to go through to be discharged from hospital. We started to get a clearer picture of what this looked like from all the different angles. And we came up with a map. This is our map. And actually what we identified was the recognition of a change in need for a child's care was really a key point in the child's journey. And this allowed processes to be started in different arenas such as housing and commissioning and training. But sometimes this recognition came quite late in a child's journey. And so we looked at ways of bringing this recognition earlier. We also looked at sharing mental models or ideas around barriers to discharge in regular meetings, such as multidisciplinary discharge planning meetings. The other recognition was around the discharge day and the work that needed to happen before and indeed afterwards to make this a psychologically safe and smooth process. We used this incredibly rich intel, which was co-produced with families and young people, to create our palette of support. We called it Canvas. What we wanted to do was colour what the child and family needed to move forward. Did they just need medical care, a bit of green, or maybe they needed lots of yellow equipment, or some purple accommodation, or maybe a little splattering of blue to support this family in caring for their child. Colour always goes with parties, and parties were really important. Parties for children that didn't go to parties, and parties for siblings that were stuck in hospitals or at home without their parents whilst their sibling was being cared for. We dressed up, we baked cake, we coloured in, and we connected with families in ways that enabled them to be able to share their stories and to trust us and to help us identify the ways that we would be able to help both them and other families move forward. And this was really important. More important when COVID struck. There was a lot of distress, families needing support, families without respite care, families anxious about children getting sick with coronavirus, families worried about how they would manage if parents weren't able to care for children. It was all very difficult. We also had a lot of anxiety in children that were still stuck in hospital. But interestingly, we were able to use what we knew about the processes and the intel that families had given us to enable rapid discharge. We got together around a table with the key stakeholders and obtained feedback from families and looked at good enough discharge to get families home. We recognised delays in equipment processing, especially ventilators, and sourced equipment to be able to loan to families to get them out quicker. And in total, we saved 1,000 bed days, and one child went home with multiple bits of equipment 4 months earlier than they would have done had we not done this. Ultimately, the learning was around barriers and how we would overcome them. This was very scary. It was scary for us, but also it was scary for children and their families. We enabled this movement forward by talking and being able to get the feedback to jump together. Cots and white goods were sourced on Amazon by our therapy department and paid for by social care. We were able to source third-party temporary accommodation to try and bypass the complex rehousing process. And we enabled families to get out of hospital. The other thing that we have managed to produce with the help of feedback from families is our MDT toolkit, an essential part of how we connect together to try and move children and young people forward. Ultimately, connecting with young people and families during our journey has enabled us to see the things that we would clearly miss had their input not been there. The elephant in the room, the elephant that stops us moving forward. And ultimately, if we work together, we can find the key to solutions that we had not thought possible and to doors that we had not thought that we would be able to unlock. Thank you.
So thank you, Mary. I thought that presentation was amazing, and just hearing something like one child being saved 4 months in hospital, well done for the work that you're doing. So should we move on to my presentation?
I'll wait to see your presentation.
Here we go then. Hello, so I'm Gill Phillips, the creator of Whose Shoes, and I'm delighted to be with you at this collab event today. I use social media a lot, and let's take this hashtag collab21 and make a noise with it today as we talk about co-production and how to make it real. So Whose Shoes, as you've heard, is a tool that looks at issues from different perspectives and brings people together everybody who should be interested in improving the area that we're talking about things that matter, and most importantly as equals. So we do work in all sorts of different subject areas, and I've circled there children and young people as the most relevant today, but I'll share a link to our Padlet and you can dip into the kind of work that we do across, as I say, all kinds of different topics. And I set up Who's Shoes because I wanted to make a difference. I'm proud that it's seen as a very inclusive approach. The eldest person we've ever had at one of our workshops, to our knowledge, 101 years old, and the youngest was actually 4 days old, and it brings people together as equals. It's a catalyst for change. That's a fancy way of saying, really, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what's actually stopping you? And sometimes the barriers are perceived rather than real. And if we work together, we can find ways to change systems and to make small and large changes that really make a difference to people's lives. So it's an award-winning tool. I'm proud of that. I'm thrilled to bits that I've been mentioned just this week as a wild card. I love that name, by HSJ. Co-production has been announced as the default way of doing things around here by the NHS, and I'm on their task and finish group. So what's not to like? But for me, none of these things will happen unless you get the right conditions to make change, to add a bit of magic, and the magic comes from people. So we've heard a bit from Helen about some of the work that we've done together with Who's Shoes. Wonderful story, because Helen Calvert literally initiated so much. Her video very much underplays the role that she's had in bringing major change to Liverpool in particular. And Joanne Minford, the wonderful paediatrician surgeon that she worked with. I'm really proud of this story because it really has led to real action. But Who's Shoes really is about creating the right space. People can tell whether you're interested in what they've got to say. Valuing people and actually listening hard to what people say is the top tip, really. This is a picture here of some of our Who's Shoes resources. So we crowdsource scenarios from real perspectives, and poems can sometimes reach people in ways, as you've heard with Theoretical Mummy, that perhaps other approaches don't reach. And to build energy. Now, people like Joanne Minford, absolutely full of energy. Here's Jo packing her car, taking the Who's Shoes board game, but most importantly, collaborating across Alder Children's Hospital and Liverpool Women's Hospital to find out how things can be improved for parents and for children. And we were in the Innovation Hub, which was exciting. This was the first event that we held. So Carrie Lewis there from New Possibilities doing a graphic record at the back there, faithfully recording the conversations of what people were saying. And I love this from Jo, never too much feedback, never too many post-its, because people have got loads of things they want to tell you, big things and small things, and those post-its feed through and form that vibrant record of the event. So this was the finished one. You can see on the right there's a wish list there, and the wish list would contain lots of things that would be familiar to you. And I think fix the simple things, small things make a difference is going to be a real theme of today, and transferring power to the patients and to the family carers. And I love this quote from Jo Minford. Basically, after the Who's Shoes event, she said, whenever we started to argue, we all agreed that it was not about us and what we individually thought. It was about what we had said and working together to make it happen. And I think that's the power of true co-production, following up together. So this was a graphic record from the event at Liverpool Women's Hospital, Jo tweeting it using social media, graphic large as life on the main corridor. I love that. It's not something behind the scenes, it's there for people to see and to be reminded about. So co-production can lead to big things. In Liverpool, it led to a new level 3 NICU unit at Alder. But the quote here, where we're up to so far, this was another tweet from Jo, neonatology and PICU consultants having a clinical conflab yesterday, previously never saw each other. That's huge. Communication, it's patient safety, and it's also hopefully job satisfaction. It's more real for people. So the little things make a big difference. We've heard about a big change there, but what are the little things? So lemon light bulb moments we talk about, what are they? Well, it absolutely makes my heart sing if perhaps healthcare professionals come along. Good people, they work in a particular way, but suddenly they realise the impact of something simple like choice of words, language, behaviour, assumptions, perhaps reflect and become more, I'm going to do that a little bit differently tomorrow, I'm going to do that a little bit differently from now on, and that's exciting because that's cumulative. And behaviour change, you can have the statistics. This was from one of our very first maternity workshops, and it was in Guernsey, and they were saying that whooshes have made a big difference. But what I was really interested in was the stories that sat behind it. The obstetrician who came up to me and said, Gill, I spend way too long looking at my screen when I should perhaps be looking more at the woman. And then I ran this past Mary while we were preparing for this session, and she said, but that can be a system change as well. If you've got a screen in one direction and the patient that you're talking to in another direction, you can't look at them both naturally together, but that's what you want. So little things and comments can lead to systemic change as well, which again is very exciting. I never wanted to complain. This is a whooshes scenario. I never really wanted to complain. I just wanted to be listened to. It just feels as if the only way to be heard these days is to make an official complaint. Otherwise, no one's interested. Now, we have those kind of quite provocative cards, and people think, oh, how easy do we make it? Just to chat to people, for them to tell us how they're feeling without needing to make that big confrontation. So this is the kind of little exercise that we could do if we wanted to build on that, if we had a bit more time. You might like to put some comments in the chat. We've done a lot of work around language. It comes through at all our different events, regardless of the topic. Medical language, excluding people, words like failure, consistently in maternity care, failure to progress in labour, failure to dilate, failure to get pregnant possibly. How can we change things so that the wording is more positive and less upsetting to people? I love this concept, be curious. The hashtag what matters to you is central really to whooshes work and always has been. But I attended a session recently with Bob Claber, a wonderful doctor, and he was talking about the concept of being curious. That if a patient perhaps isn't apparently listening, or that awful word complying, to find out, as Mary has spoken about so strongly today, what actually makes people tick, what they're frightened of, and to go there and be interested rather than perhaps just say the same thing louder and think people are idiots because they're not listening or they're not doing the right thing. So whooshes sessions always lead to pledges and actions and connections, and as Helen has said, if somebody's already done it somewhere else, then if you can connect with them, you save yourself reinventing the wheel. Now, I was absolutely thrilled to see on Twitter that Balsam, who I've been following really closely with her story of her son Daniel, who sadly has been taken suddenly very ill in Newcastle, and now just coming out of hospital and starting the next stage of his journey and starting a fundraiser, which I think is amazing, for caregivers, so for parents of children with long-term complex needs. And a pledge today could be to look up Daniel's campaign and see how we can support him. So in terms of the difference that we make, lots of small things we probably never get to hear about. We love connecting with people and hearing what happens as a result of our workshop, but the perhaps bigger, more transferable, simple things we've collected into various books of case studies, which again I can share links to in the chat. So that's been a real whistle-stop tour of whooshes, but I hope it's helped set a bit of energy for your event and inspire people to think about how they can make co-production real.
I always get really emotional when watching that, Jo. It's so exciting. And there's so many hashtags and lots of stuff in the chat as well. around the positivity. And I think that was what came across when we started talking, is just that feeling of, you know, just that we could change the world if we just worked together, and it was all very positive.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. It's just been such fun planning it together, and I'm sure this is just the beginning. So, you know, it's fantastic to get the chance to just tell people a little bit more about what we're doing. And as I've mentioned, Whose Shoes is all about pledges and actions. And today we've got the most amazing thing to announce. So look at Mary and how excited she is. What's all this about then, Mary? Intentional coffee? Well,
it was just that moment where, so I think probably the first time we met, you know, virtually, we kind of realized that we'd had connections before. We'd met at a Q community event and bumped into each other at coffee. And I think it was around that idea that you would connect with somebody and think, oh, I really, really want to spend a bit of time talking to you about what you're doing. And the idea that that connection could spark ideas and impact on your work. And I think often we are very unintentional in those connections. It will be just whoever just happens to go for the same, you know, biscuit at the break. And actually, so we decided that that was something that was really, it captured us, this idea about planning and intentional coffee. And we know that connections are slightly different in the post-COVID world. We know that we have to be more intentional about the things that we're doing. And actually, if you're planning a virtual thing, it has to be an intentional. So we together came up with this idea of having an intentional coffee and challenging people to think about that a little bit. So what, you challenged me first, I think, didn't you, Gill?
Well, I think I did. You can just see I am a big connector. I love connecting people, and I meet someone like Mary, and I'm working with someone like Joanne Minford that you've heard about from Liverpool, and I just can't help myself but wanting to connect them. So are we going to do that live today, we think, Mary? We've got Joe. Have we got Joe? No, so, Joe and Mary have never spoken before. Is that right?
Yeah, never.
So it's lovely to meet you, Mary.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. A little bit emotional, as you say, after listening to Gill describe everything that's happened over the last few years in Liverpool, and sort of getting the opportunity to remember all those things that sometimes you sort of forget your journey.
I think it is really interesting how they spark, and we had lots of these sparks when we were talking, but I feel like I kind of know you a little bit from all the stuff that Joel said, but I wondered if you could tell me a bit about yourself. And
yeah, sure. So I'm a paediatric surgeon. I work in Liverpool at Alder Hospital. I've worked there as a consultant for about 10 years now. I was always interested in the experience of receiving healthcare, and it's particularly complicated, I think, in children, because we have so many people's experiences to think about. But I was also really interested in how that experience affected the care that you could give, and what your therapeutic relationship was, and what the simple things, as we've said a few times, could be. And I'd done some work with the Point of Care Foundation, as they are now, the people from the King's Fund at the time, about experience-based design. And then in 2014, I had my own serious illness. Actually, I was away from work for 18 months, and the sort of ground shifts underneath you, and you suddenly become a receiver rather than a giver, and it sort of all came into focus a little bit. I met Gill through Helen. Amazingly, not surprising, really. And sort of recognised Helen as a bit of a force of nature. And one of my interests in paediatric surgery is neonatal surgery. So that's how Helen and I came across each other. I'd gone back to I'd gone back to Manchester after a time away and realised that we weren't really breastfeeding any babies on our neonatal unit, and thought, what? How, I didn't realise this before, but, what's going on here? Because we all recognise the, myriad advantages of breastfeeding for children that aren't challenged, babies that aren't challenged. So I think that's how I ended up in touch with Helen, and Helen introduced me to Gill. And I have this really sort of vivid memory, Gill, of being on the phone with you the first time we spoke, and we were on the phone for about an hour and a half or something, just talking to each other. We'd never met each other before, and we were just going, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And it was so exciting. One thing I think about, I just reflect about what Gill said about energy, and it's easy to think when you maybe look at people like Helen and maybe me, from what Gill said, is that we have like boundless energy all the time, and it's almost unachievable to be so energetic all the time. That is 100% not the case. We just, like everybody else, have our ebbs and flows, our frustrations, our times when we think this is blocked and we can't get through. And what I've learned over the last few years, I think, is to just keep going, and tenacity is perhaps one of the most important characteristics that you can have.
That's really, really lovely. And I think that resonates, that kind of, when things aren't going so well and the printer's broken, and your patient hasn't done as well, hasn't done as well as you'd like. I think it's just that regrouping. I wondered whether you had any reflections on the impact of co-production on your work. So you've done a lot of work with in the neonatal forum, and actually how has that journey evolved, and where's that taken you? Be really interested to hear.
So I don't know how many people know Alder. Alder opened a new hospital about 5 years ago, and it's an absolutely beautiful hospital, and it works really well most of the time for the patients. And I don't think anybody would argue with me that it's quite a patient and family centered environment, but it's really tough working there as particularly as nursing staff. So we've got 75% single rooms, more than that actually on the wards. We've had to really change and think about how that affects the way that we work. And it struck me that we'd taken lots of things into account about how children and families wanted to receive their healthcare and what they needed from their environment. So, for example, we don't have a hospital kitchen that provides meals to the ward anymore. What we have is a chef on every ward that makes some food for the children. So when they want to eat, they can have some food. It's not sort of 5 o'clock, the tea trolley's here. You can have not quite whatever you want, but building on sort of the things that people had told the team that were working on designing the hospital, what they realised is we were wasting such a lot of food, and actually to kit out a fully, chef standard kitchen and employ a chef actually is a lot cheaper than what we were doing, and ticks the box for the kids. But what struck me is that we hadn't really got people together, staff, managers, operational people, and children and families, to talk about that together. And maybe we'd missed a trick there a little bit, and we'd probably made things harder for staff, and we probably set those two things up in conflict, the staff experience and the patient and family experience. So when we started thinking about what was happening with neonates, and I've been on the neonate journey for a long time, I'm a little bit of a strange paediatric surgeon, I think, or just a strange surgeon maybe, in thinking a lot about experience. When we started thinking about what our particular issues in Liverpool were, and needing to get people together to really get good, I hate the word engagement, but good involvement across the city and of all the right people, it seemed to me that this is, you know, whose shoes was going to kick us off in the right way, let's face it. So we have in Liverpool, we have a women's hospital, which is 3 miles away from our children's hospital. It's crazy, but that's the way it is. It's not going to change anytime in the next 30, 40, 50 years. And we just have to cope with it. But it gives us some really important challenges, both in experience. You know, you can imagine being a mum and your baby having a surgical problem and having to be transferred and you can't go, and maybe you've had a section. You can imagine being the dad, driving up and down the road, which is Edge Lane. Do I go and see the mum? Do I go and see the baby? Mum's going, go and see the baby. I need to know what's happening with the baby. Dad's going, yeah, but I want to be with you because you're not very well. And oh, awful, awful. And then some of the premature babies that we have looked after at the neonatal unit at Liverpool Women's need surgery too, but then we don't have, we have a PICU, but it's not a neonatal environment as such. And those babies shuttling up and down this busy road in Liverpool, 3 miles, coming and going when they needed surgery, just 100 million opportunities to make mistakes, get things wrong, mess the communication up, traumatise parents. Oh, I could go on forever. So we started working with Liverpool Women's, as Gill sort of intimated there, to try and make some of these issues better. But also we sort of started working to work out how we were going to achieve the standards and what we were going to do in Liverpool to make a commissionable service, really. And so whose shoes for our neonatal service, which is now a neonatal partnership across the 2 sites. So we've still got 2 trusts, and that's not going to change, you know, in the near future. We've got lots of tensions on either side that mean that we can't come together as one organisation. But what we have done is formed a clinically led partnership, which is supported by both our executive teams, to make a service that works over 2 sites, but with 1 team of people, with 1 governance structure, with 1 set of policies and protocols, so that it feels the same whichever site you're on, and that we're working together. And whose shoes is sort of, for me, that's formed the bedrock of how we do that. So we've got this wonderful graphic that Gill's shown you, and that for me, and there's one of those up at Alder, and there's one of those down at Liverpool Women's, and they are on display in the wards there. And for me, that's our sense check to keep going back to. You know, so what did people tell us when we did this? What did we say? What did we all say when we did this? Yeah, we said we weren't going to do that, so we're not going to do that. We said that was a problem, that's an issue. Let's, you know, whatever pressures there are, that's not where we're going. This is our true north. And people talk about true north a lot in improvement work. So now, as Gill said, I could talk forever about this, but as Gill said, we've just gone out to tender to build our neonatal unit at Alder. It's challenging, I'm not going to lie to you. Partnership working is really, really challenging, but you get the energy to pursue I was going to say pursue the dream. It sounds a little bit intense, that, doesn't it? But to pursue what you know is right by having this wonderful shared vision that we've got, having fantastic parents who have been with you all the way.
I am going to stop you two nattering, because you could go on nattering indefinitely, but you can have an intentional coffee together in the coffee break, so I can bring in some other questions, if that's okay. Yeah,
that's fine. There are lots of, I was sort of, you know, not looking at the questions, but I was just going to say, Hilary, you maintain your energy by knowing what's right and working with everybody along the same path and the same vision.
Right, thank you. Well, I just want to reflect on some of the things that are up in the chat and a couple of the questions. To note that Daniel's campaign link is up in the chat. To note a common theme, everybody, please listen. I've heard it so many times and we don't get better. Stop calling people mum and dad, and stop calling stop using the term baby when baby has a name. So that's a sort of shout out. Sarah Barkley from Medical Mediation Foundation has talked about wanting input into the work that she's doing across 3 sites on conflict, so input across 3 sites already. So Sarah, put your email address up please in the chat, because there are people who clearly want to contact you. We've got a question about whether the Who Shoes board game can be bought online. And then can I just, then there's some questions as well. There's one from Leanne Turner, who's worked with parents in Liverpool, but wants to know how to get input from other health communities, other health people in other health systems, other health services. I've got one, so I'm going to be cheeky and back onto that and to ask Gill about really engaging the families who are harder to reach, which is always the challenge. We tend to get the more articulate middle class families, but actually some of the ones you really need to hear about are those who are more marginalized or maybe not English speaking. And there was another question, but I'll let you start on those ones first, if that's okay.
Okay, well, thanks, Hilary. I think it's all about creating the conditions and reaching people where they are. So who is it you want to reach, and are they likely to come along to your events? Probably not. So through the work that we've done smaller events. So for example, some bespoke work around smoking in pregnancy. Now, would you really want to come along to a big event and say, you know, be told it's not good for you to smoke during pregnancy? You know, let's explore where people are coming from, what's actually going on in their lives and their families. And we've had travellers coming to events in Ireland. We've done a young parents event with Mary's Trust, so the forward-thinking Birmingham people in Birmingham, obviously, but young carers, young parents who are actually care leavers. So we've done work around all sorts of different topics, and not just maternity and children related, but we've had people with dementia coming along to our events. We had someone who had dementia, and as it turns out, if you see the person had been a public speaker in his past life, actually coming up to the front of the workshop and feeling the love in the room as he kind of told people his story. And he wouldn't have done that just by saying, come along and be open and honest and we want to hear your views. You've got to make people feel valued, and then I don't think anybody doesn't want to share their story, you know.
Thank you, thank you. And there's a really important one here, which is about how you manage when the clinicians are reluctant to listen to parents, and how to address that. That's from Rachel.
Poems.
Right.
The poems really reach people in ways that other approaches don't. They're just from the heart, and I think people hear them differently. And it's quite hard to be, I think the scenarios, sometimes people can be, oh yeah, we do that. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear perhaps just briefly what Joe's experience of that has been.
I think that the poems sort of get underneath, particularly for staff. They just get straight to some sort of emotional core. It's really impressive, and it was really unexpected for me to see that work, Jill. I can't agree with you more.
And we've done it a lot more during the lockdown. The poems have really come to the fore, and we've had audios of I mean, today you had Helen Calvert actually reading that poem, so you can hear the authentic voice as well.
Yeah. Good. I think we have to wrap up there, but if you get a chance to look at the chat and answer any of the questions that we haven't covered, that would be brilliant. I think everybody's now so energized and inspired, so that's been a fantastic kickoff to the conference. Thank you so much.